want to talk to you about raising money for ministry, and I wanted to say first, there are 4 pillars, and you'll find all of this in the book. The first thing, and possibly the most important thing, is it's your job, right? The senior minister is the chief resource raiser, and that you've got to actually grasp that, because we'll see later on it's attached to teaching, it's attached to vision. Nobody is in the position of doing it like you're in the position of doing it. And I think psychologically, it's when ministers grasp that and they say, yes, I'm going to take that on, I'm going to climb that hill. That's the first hurdle. The second hurdle, of course, is knowing exactly what to do. But what I've found in many, many situations is that people really don't think that that's part of the deal at all. And frankly, you know, you might be lucky or blessed, or whichever theological word you want to put to it, and get to a church where you've got some sort of converted Kerry Packer or Jamie Packer that's able to dole out hordes and hordes of money. But that might be the very, very great exception. But 99 times out of 100, it is your job, and you will see just from Chris's talk there, it was also the Apostle Paul's job. You'll find it, Moses did a bit of it in his day, and David did it. Our Lord Jesus had wealthy ladies, or some ladies that actually supported the apostolic ministry. We don't know how that happened, but one way along or other, the leader generally needs to be the main one who is doing this. He might have help, you might have people that are fixing up all the details, but unless you are prepared to say front and centre, this is my job, you've got a real problem. And one of the great things about church planters is, and I think I heard Andrew Hurd say this, church planters are generally hungry. You know, if you're in an established church and you've just got to get a little bit more, established church ministers generally can sort of sit back a little bit more and sort of say, well, maybe it's somebody else's job. But a church plant knows that, you know, you're going to sink or swim. You're going to die tomorrow if you don't do it. So one of the great things about talking to you guys, I see a lot of hungry blokes out there. So I hope that's good. Is it true, Stuart, that church planters are hungry people?
Of course.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the church needs to have a credible, shared vision of the future. And there are, I really like the phrase I got out of one of the books. There are 2 sorts of churches, said this particular book. One is live the vision, and the other one is pay the bills. And you can be a live the vision sort of church, or you can be a pay the bills sort of church. And I'll show you what I mean exactly a little bit later on about what is a pay the bills sort of church. But that you've got to have some inspiring future for your organisation, and it shouldn't be too hard for gospel ministers to be planting an inspiring future of what they want to do. And you've got to, it's got to be credible, you know, it can't be pie in the sky. It's got to be shared, so that while you might be the birther of the vision, it's got to be in some way embraced by the congregation, and you've actually got to go through a process of getting them to embrace that with your senior leadership team. And you've got to then hold that vision up to people and say, here it is, and will you give to that? And so that's pretty critical. But well, I'll give you an example a little bit later on of a pay the bills sort of situation. You've got to teach and preach about generosity, just like Chris did, because this is not about money, it's about the heart, and Chris mentioned that again. It's not so much that we're talking about money issues per se, it's that we're talking about a transformation in people's lives, and when their life gets transformed, then they will give. And you've got to show, but you've got to show them how to do it. And you've got to give them the biblical principles of it, and you've got to repeat the biblical principles of it, because, you know, it'll just leak away, and you know, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. It's, you know, it's sort of the the last domino to fall in the lordship of Christ. You know, people get converted and some of their sinful practices drop off and you get to grow in God. Well, I think grabbing onto the money is generally the last domino that falls. And so you've actually got to be showing people that it needs to fall and how they can do it. The next thing to do is to have a gracious way to ask. Because what I've found is that, particularly when I was a new minister, you just don't know what to do. You don't know whether you're going to ask for money and people are going to get up and attack you, or whether they're going to leave the church. People are always nervous about that. They're also nervous about the way to do it. You know, do you get up and say, "You brood of vipers, give some more money," and things like that? You think that's probably wrong, or you're desperate one day and the bills aren't coming in and you're working real hard and you get up and you lose your temper at the congregation and saying, "If you stingy mob were giving more," you know. So you've got to actually have a way to ask that is gracious and godly and biblical, and you can do it. And Chris did a great job of that this morning. But those are the four things. And if I was going to add anything to that, and I was wondering, because those four things are in the book, I thought if I was going to rewrite the book again, maybe I would add that you've got to have a scrupulous integrity in the way you count it and what you do with it. Because if you've got a reputation for being dodgy, people aren't going to give you any money. So maybe you could add a fifth principle to that, and that's all in about the way you spend it. It's all in about the way you count it, the way you bank it, the way it's audited. All of that sort of stuff is critically important. And you see that reflected a little bit in 2 Corinthians as well, where Paul talks about the integrity of the process in one place. So they're the 5 pillars. And what I want to do is actually sort of take you through how some of those 5 pillars will work their way out. I'm not going to be hugely theological today. I will have some theology in because, and Scott and I were chatting about this before, fundamentally, when I talk to guys from your background, I am assuming you will know the Bible pretty well. Okay, that is my general assumption. What I did find is that I could get lots and lots of books on a theology of money, but it took me till I was about 50 till I found anybody that would tell me actually just how to go and do it. So it's the going and doing it I'm talking about today, but I don't want you to think in any way, shape or form that the background theology of money is not important. It is, but I'm assuming you know that, okay? So let me give you an example of a pay the bills sort of church. On holidays, I go to different churches, and on one particular occasion, I went to a particular church, and I've gone back there over a number of things. Now, this was in 2010, and I got their bulletin, and this was printed in the bulletin. Up to the end of October 2010, offerings have averaged $9,381 a week, well below budget and a little bit less than 2009. In other words, first statement is we're going backwards. Second statement is, while expenses are below budget, we have not been able to contain them to some extent, to the same extent that the offerings are down. In other words, we are not doing a gospel outreach ministry as much as we would like. We expect to finish 2010 with a budget shortfall of approximately $24,000. In other words, we're fast going down the gurgler. This is not a church that's going to make you excited about giving money to them. Expenses reflect current trends with some allowances for cost increases. Okay. Offerings are budgeted for next year for $10,113 a week. So they're budgeting. While this is a $732 a week increase on covenant offerings, our average Sunday attendance is close to 200. So if each person attending puts in an extra $2, we would be covered. Please never say that. Don't say that. That won't get you any more money. Second thing, if the offertories don't reach the budget amount for the first quarter of next year, the leadership team sees little alternative but to recommend reducing the church staff. In other words, we're just going to cut back and not do any more gospel ministry. Now, the interesting thing is I've gone back to that church from time to time. Their offertories are probably still at the same level. They haven't increased at all. ministers have changed, but I see that sort of thing so often. And the thing that's wrong with it is we have a need. We've got a money need. You help us to fix that need. It's all about money, isn't it? There's nothing about gospel. There's nothing about vision. There's nothing about outreach. And even the $2 a week you might say that and say, but that's not how we want you to give, because there are some of you. See, what happens is people don't give on average. There is an 80-20 rule. 20% of the people give 80% of the money. So you don't want the rich people giving an extra $2. You want the rich people giving an extra $20. If you tell the rich people they can give an extra $2, they will give the extra $2. But you want them to give 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, because there'll be lots and lots of people who won't give anything at all. And there's an interesting study by I've got the quote in the book, but it was an American sociological study, and basically 50% of American churches, the congregation, 50% of the congregants, the people who went, were giving nothing at all, absolutely nothing. So so you've got to make up for all the nothings that to get the other ones. So you've got to realise that the money sort of has a peak like that, and so if you're down a certain amount per week, just telling people to give an extra cup of coffee or something is not going to help you very much. But my broader point is, this is a pay the bill sort of situation. It breathed none of the ethos that you heard in Chris's talk about partnering for gospel ministry. But sadly, that's just what happens. You see thermometers in churches, and you see offertory things in churches where you've got the bulletin comes out, and where you see a graph, and we're down $100 a week, and all of that's okay to a certain extent. But what I would want to suggest to you is you might want to give this figure in the context of a big, broader gospel vision, and you want to say, what we've been doing for Jesus this week is A, B, C, and D. And these people have been converted, and this ministry is being done, and these poor people are being helped. All of this ministry combined costs that much. At the moment, we've got this much. I want to thank everybody for their generosity, but for you can help us to win more people to Jesus, because we just don't want to reach this level. We want to reach this level. So you've got to stretch people out. But this doom and gloom stuff won't work very much at all. Okay. There are two sorts of major outreaches. Oh, you could probably spin out some more, but there's two sorts. There's ongoing weekly offering for weekly offering and small projects, and that could include missionary things as well. And some of the missionary things could be large projects, but that's your ongoing things. Your average operating budgets and the things where you want to fix the kitchen or put a new TV in the children's ministry centre, or put some carpets in this, or put a dishwasher in here, or start a new ministry over here. And then you've got the larger capital works projects where you might have to be raising, millions of dollars to put on a new extension or something like this. I presume somebody did something here when they put this. I don't know how much this would have cost to do, but somebody must have paid for it. Maybe they had a grant, I don't know. But presumably this was a slightly bigger project than normal. So you've got these two different sorts. I'm mainly talking this morning about the first sort. I've got some material in the book about the second sort. So if you've got a big capital works project coming up, there's some stuff in that about it. But what I'm talking about is the foundations for week by week giving. And what we did at Fig Tree, and I stumbled across this, probably when I was about 50. Is we had an annual commitment day, and I stumbled across some of the material from American stuff. American stuff can be good, and it can be particularly American, if you know what I mean. It's got to be adapted for our scenarios, but that's basically what I did. And on that commitment day, we asked the congregation to do two things. One, we asked them to make a financial commitment for the next year. and this is really important. This is the gracious way to ask, and you actually have to go and ask them to do something. And secondly, we ask them at the same time to make an offering to support certain special projects. Okay, two things, and I did them at the same time. Other people might do it differently, but the way we did it at a particular time of the year that I'll explain a little bit later on. First, will you make a commitment, to give X dollars a week to the church next year? Now, we are going to give you a range of projects. Would you give us a bucket of money to support one or more of these projects? Okay, that was the two things. So you've got to explain this every year. You can't just do it once and expect people are going to get it. You've just got to keep doing it. I always signed my card in front of the congregation. I had 4 services, so 4 or 5 services. I signed it 4 or 5 times in front of them. I generally walked down into the congregation so that they could see me do it, and I explained it every year so that the old timers would just keep on being refreshed, but there'll be new people every year, and they need to see it. They need to have it explained. You don't expect people will get it once. After we'd been doing it about 9 years, the lovely lady in the clip there had joined our congregation, and I got the idea that it really needed to be freshened up. And freshening things up is pretty important. I will give you a process to do. We worked hard on it just to make sure it wasn't just the same old every year, and so the puppet thing was to freshen it all up. And as you know, puppets can say incredibly outlandish things and get away with it. The other thing it's important, I think, and we'll see this a little bit later on, is to use some sort of humour. Because humour, people have got they're often sitting there, they're holding onto their wallets effectively. You're not going to get, a bit like, Benjamin Franklin used to sit under George Whitfield's preaching and saying, "You're not getting my money today," and Whitfield would always get it, but they're nervous about that. And so I'm not talking about doing anything Machiavellian. I'm not doing anything manipulative. Please don't hear that. But humour tends to unite people, and it tends to break down barriers. And on this particular issue, where there's a whole where we know that for gospel reasons, this is really important, and we know that we don't want to make lords of our money, and yet the world does make lords of the money. We've got to break down those apprehensions, those fears, and that habit just to hold on to the wallet, and humour can tend to do that. Okay, let's look at the next one. Some key issues, and I'm talking about key issues in running a commitment day. And I'm not going to deal with everything, because I'm hoping you'll buy the book and it will be in there. But I want to say that you might say, "Oh, I've got a small church and Fig Tree was a large church," but this has got nothing to do with big church, small church. This has got to do with general principles. And the guy that I effectively learnt from in this. Actually started it off in a little church in the middle of the United States with 3 members. So, it works in small churches, it works in big churches, it works in middle-sized churches, because there are principles involved that will operate everywhere. The results might be slightly different depending on the economic circumstances of your situation, and you might have to apply things slightly differently, but the principles are still the same. I think it's essential to actually get people to sign the cards. Okay? You want them actually to make a commitment, because when they sign the cards, that actually is sort of underlining that I've really done something important in this, and people really they quite like it. And the other thing is, I would suggest to you, and you may have a bit of a challenge with this, but the minister needs to know, and I really believe this very importantly, because normally what happens is that you might say, "Oh, I've heard ministers say this, and good ones," and so I'm just telling you I'm parting company with some people here. But the minister needs to know, because I believe from the bottom of my heart this is a faith issue, rather than a money issue. And if you believe it's a money issue, then you might let the treasurer know, but you won't. But if it's a faith issue, why wouldn't you know? Okay? Because supposing somebody comes up to you and confides in you something about their marriage, right? Or their children, or about struggles they're having at work, or about whatever it is. Well, then you're their pastor. Well, Jesus says this is the biggest challenge. It's like the barometer of the soul, people's attitudes to money. So why would you say that what Jesus is saying is the biggest issue in people's, the last domino to fall? Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Surely that is a pastoral issue, and therefore, in principle, to me, the pastor should know. Now, generally, the comeback might be I don't want to play favouritism. Well, if you're aware that that's the case, you probably won't. You'll probably bend over backwards the other way. And frankly, I would suggest you play favouritism in a whole range of areas. Because see, the issue is people in your congregation, they will give you their time and they will give you their money. Okay? You know the ones who are giving you their time. And I would suggest that many of us will play favourites to the ones who are giving you time. We spend more time with them, obviously, than the others. But you just don't know the ones who are giving you money. And there are some people who are very time poor but cash rich, and they can't give you much time, but they can fund your ministry. And I would suggest to you that this is, because it's a faith issue, because it's about people's souls, it's about the way in which they relate to God, then it's something that in principle you should know. Now, I almost never went out to anybody and said, oh, look, you're giving $20 a week, and I know you're a school teacher and you're a stingy so-and-so and you should be giving $100. I almost never did that. I don't think I ever did that. But the very fact that I did know was to actually raise this flag that this was a faith issue rather than a money issue. And it bounced back on me very, very interestingly the first time, because the first time I ever did it, I explained very carefully to the congregation. I made this comment about, supposing I went down, I went to you down to see you at work one day. So I saw a guy and I said, how's you going on with your marriage? And and how are you going on with your Bible reading, and how are you going on with other areas in your life? And you'd go home to your wife and say, oh, Rod came and saw me the other day and he really put the hard word on me, asking how we were going, were we praying together, were we doing all of those things? And then I said, well, you'd probably come to the experience, well, maybe he did put the hard word on me about those things, but that's what we pay him to do, to talk to us about our spiritual life. Well, why should the money be off the agenda? Why should we actually say, well, that's quarantined? Well, that was very interesting, because that went over reasonably well in the congregation. They all smiled and they got that. I could see they were understanding that. And one guy comes up to me afterwards and he said, Rod, we've been out to lunch a number of times. He said, you've never asked me about my prayer life. You've never asked me about whether I'm praying with my wife. I'm thinking, yeah, mate, you're absolutely right. And I determined that every time after that I went out to talk to a guy, I'd be asking him about how his family was, how his prayer life was, all of those sort of things. And the next year I did it, I told that story and I told this guy's comment to me, and I repented. I said, look, I got to tell you, I fouled up there. But yeah, my point simply is I believe it's a faith issue. It's not a money issue. It's an issue of the heart, and therefore, in principle, as pastors, you should know. You need the endorsement of whatever board, parish council, group of elders, whatever you want to call that group, which has different names in different churches. They need to endorse that, because they're the key leaders, and the staff need to be the key leaders. Those guys need to be signing the forms, and they need to be endorsing the process. And for us, we announce their collective amount before the commitment day, because leaders lead. And one of the things that I insisted with my parish council, and I would suggest to you that Anglican speak parish council, you might have elders, you might have, I'm not sure what tribal cluster you've actually got in your church, but We used to break in the middle of the meeting and we would pray for one another and we'd pray for the ministry. I learnt that from Philip Jensen. He was a very smart guy. And so basically what normally happens at these parish council meetings or board meetings, you have a perfunctory prayer at the start and you have a perfunctory prayer at the end, and you do all this business in the middle. But what we did was we broke them up and we prayed in the middle. And so that was very, very helpful, because it's very difficult for people to be constantly arguing with one another if they're praying for one another, and it's very difficult for them to stop it. Okay? Can you imagine somebody who didn't want to pray in the meetings going out and saying, the wretched clergyman, the wretched pastor, he wants me to stop and pray in the meeting? So it immediately kills off all the unspiritual people. They just drop off your boards. So if you've got unspiritual people on your parish councils or boards or whatever it is, do that, and they'll run for the hills, because they hate it, but they can't fight it. It's marvellous. The other thing is you get them to give. I get them to sign forms. And so I would say to the congregation every time we were coming round for the Anglican Speak vestry meeting that would elect the parish council for the next year, I'd get up and sort of tell them that that the nominations were coming up, and I'd want to say, look, I just want you to know that these are a wonderful group of parish councillors, that they really do care for you. They take their work very, very seriously that we've had, and they pray in the meetings. We break in the middle of the meetings, we pray for you, we pray for one another, and every one of them is going to give a commitment, signs a commitment card. In other words, this is code for, if you want to join our group, this is what you're going to do. So you've got a filter. You just don't get crazy people coming along and saying, I want to join, and make a pest of themselves, because you've actually raised the bar before you've even started. And I do remember a few years ago, many years ago, I used to say to people, don't nominate people for parish council without talking to me first, because you see, I knew who were card signers, and so I wanted to have that filter. But sometimes people had jumped the gun, and there was one really, really nice young lady who joined the church, very bright girl, and she hadn't been along for a while, but somebody had put her name up. They bypassed my system, so I called her into the office, and I said, I hear you sticking your name up, so and so. And she said, yeah. I said, I just want you to know. She was a godly girl, and she was a bright girl, and I didn't have a problem with having her, but I didn't want the other problems. I said, I just want you to know that in the middle of the meetings we break up and pray, and we pray for one another. Are you comfortable with that? She said, yes. And I said, we all sign a commitment card that goes out to the congregation, not the collective amount, not the individual amount, goes out to the congregation before the meeting. I said, are you happy with that? She said, sure. So I said, fine, I'm happy for your name to go forward. Now, we had a system where if they just wanted to be completely bloody-minded and say, I'm going to stick my name on the board and you can't do anything about it, well, they could have done it. But generally, what you're doing is creating a climate where you're filtering out any of the ones that are going to be non-spiritual or non-giving or non-generous, and encouraging all the other ones. And so we hardly had any problems with parish. We had spirited debate. We didn't have problems on core alignment issues for those two reasons. So leaders lead. Okay. The next key thing, and again, this is going to be controversial, is that the minister, I always announced my exact giving to the congregation. I would tell them the amount of dollars and cents that I gave. And I took the pattern from 1 Chronicles 29. Many of the giving campaigns are based around 1 Chronicles 29, where you have a situation where, if you remember, David is raising money for the temple that he is not going to build. He has a big vision plan, and he lays it all out in the early sections of Chronicles. And he comes to 1 Chronicles 29, and he says, okay, I am going to give out of the royal temple, out of the royal treasury. I'm going to give this amount. And he gives an enormous bucket of money. Then he pulls out his own wallet, and he says, I'm going to give out of my own money. And he gives an amount. And then it goes on, he says, then the elders get very excited about this, and they give. And it gives their collective amount, okay? And then the people rejoice. Now, I'm assuming the people also gave. I'm assuming they didn't just rejoice and not give. But the interesting thing is that little pattern of the leader, the elders, and I included staff in that, was because staff and elders were in that basic second tier. That pattern is buried in Nehemiah 7:72. I assume it took money to build the wall. It didn't actually say that it was collected, but it actually says that the governor gave and some of the elders gave. Now, if you remember Nehemiah, he had some pretty difficult people to work with, and I suspect the people who were ripping off the poor in Nehemiah 5, I think it is, were not necessarily the most generous people. So you had some of the elders, and then you had the people giving. So that threefold pattern has come through as a way in which to encourage generosity from those texts. So that's what I did every year. I would say to the congregation, I am doing this only because I am the leader and because I believe that leaders need to lead. So, please don't write me letters saying it's evil practice or you're puffing yourself up and all the rest of it. I said, the day that I stop being the rector of Fig Tree is the day I will stop doing it. And I will do it because I am the rector, not because I want you to say, oh, what a good boy am I. Please don't hear that. And often it was a real challenge for me every year to get up and actually do it. But I did. Now I'm just an ordinary congregational member. I don't do it anymore because that's not my role, but that's what I did in those cases. You can challenge that if you will. You can challenge that in the Q&A later on. I would also want to stress to you advanced planning. You can't just do this stuff. You just can't do this stuff in a moment. You've got to give yourself time, and I'm going to talk to you about a time frame that I had there a little bit. But so often I've had guys ring me up and say, "Oh, look, we're a bit short of money. I read your book. What do I do? I need to have a commitment day in 4 weeks' time." Now, I used to start the planning for our November commitment day. I used to start the planning in April. Because, and what I would start in April is I wanted, and I'll talk about preaching series, but I wanted to get the preaching series as good as I possibly could do. I wanted to, you want to hit the ball out of the park every week, but I really wanted to hit the ball out of the park on these ones because it's a sensitive topic. So round about April, I would start thinking about which passages I would pick and how I would go about doing it. And how the whole thing was going to be framed, because on that decision alone takes a lot of other decisions, because you'll need if you're going to make videos, as I'll talk to you about, and if you're going to make banners, you're going to give out literature and all of that, it's got to reflect the sort of things that you're doing in your sermon. And if you're going to have Bible studies written, if you're going to have prayer meetings done, you're going to have literature done, that what you're going to do for the preaching will generate that. So I would start then, and I would have a process that worked through over the next 6 months. Now, obviously, that wasn't the only thing I was doing, but I would just plead with you, don't just think that you can you can say, oh, well, I'll just do it in 6 weeks' time. I'm a bit stuck. Because that will be a recipe for failure. You'll say, we went along to this church planning seminar, guy got up and did a great sermon, somebody got up and gave us a few principles, but it didn't work. It doesn't work most of the time because people just don't put the hard work and effort into it, and they just get sloppy. So, all right, what was this advanced planning about? Partly, I used to give out a questionnaire. And I'd give this out round about, if you can think about the preaching thing I had to do, I'd give out the questionnaire in around about June, July. And I would say to the congregation, tell us one thing we do well and tell us one thing we should improve on. Now, I framed that 2 ways. because I wanted to give people the opportunity to have positive affirmation. Otherwise, you just get all the whingers get up and have a complaint. But I wanted people to be able to tell us the good things, and I wanted them to be able to tell us the bad things. I went to church the other day in an Anglican church in Sydney, and the minister came up to me, I'd never met him before. He said, "Tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly." Well, at least he asked. It was good. So I wanted to know. Now, the foolish thing I did the first time, and I published the results. That was the other thing. I just didn't want it to go into the system and have it not know. So I published the results. What I didn't do the first time was I foolishly forgot to tell the office not to put the people's names on the thing. And so they published them, stuck them out the front, and all the names was, and I got roasted. So we didn't make that same mistake twice, and I had to get up and apologise on bended knees. Now, the thing is, you're going to get 100 people tell you, for argument's sake, the music's too loud, and 100 people tell you that it's too soft. At Fig Tree, we had people who worked in the steelworks. They were maniacs. They would bring in sound meters. It was just a nightmare. Do you remember those crazy people in the evening service? It about drove you nuts, you know. And we had one guy on the sound who loved it, boo, up like that, and we had all these people running around with meters. It was... But, you know, if you've got, sound too loud, sound too hot, and they're roughly equal, you just know that that's not a particular issue. You've got to deal with that pastorally. But there couldn't be a whole range of things. For goodness sake, fix the toilets. If things like that, and if you're getting 50 of the people saying the same sort of thing, well, then you deal with that same sort of thing. And then you can come back to them and say, well, look, I've got a project this year. We're going to fix the toilets. You told us we're going to do it. We need your help. So effectively, you're responding to what they've already told you. But it's also got the attitude, and if you do it, again, properly and with integrity, it fosters openness. It fosters transparency. I didn't want people to think there were any devious, tricky things happening behind the scenes. So that was the first thing I did, and that was so I might get some ideas on projects. You have a commitment card. Again, the commitment cards are in the book and things like that, but basically I had an envelope, there was a commitment card in it, there was also a card about the projects that I was going to do in it, and they were asked to sign the commitment card, put it in the envelope, indicate the amount of money that was going for the projects, put this in the envelope as well, and bring it back on the day, and it would be taken up in the service. Now, okay, I always figured that people would forget, so I had the envelope, would have the envelopes out the front on the first day. If people didn't pick them up then they were mailed out. But I also have envelopes pretty much on the seat almost every week over 5 or 6 weeks. And even after the thing was over, I would still have them available. So it wasn't just, I'll give you an envelope and hope you do it. You know the story, a dog ate my envelope. It happens all the time and in churches. So that was rather important. I was in a church the other day in Toowoomba. And I saw them giving out their envelopes. I thought, yep, that's really good. So, more components. We had commitment day projects. Now, I learnt the fact that people have got a number of different pockets of money that they will give to. And people's heart gets stirred by different issues. And, for instance, if you're a missionary type person, you will give to missions. But there are some people who should give to missions who won't. Get them down and stick your foot on their throat and squeeze the life out of them, and it will still be difficult to get a penny out for missions because, that's just going out there and we don't know missionary societies rip you off, all of the misconceptions. But those people might hate the fact that the toilets need to be fixed and are not being fixed. So they will give to one project and other people will give to others. So you've got to have a range of projects. The only exception we did to this was if we had the big building campaign. When we had the massive building campaign, we're asking for millions of dollars, then we didn't dilute it. But don't think you're going to get, if you've got a big project to fix the kitchen and you want all the money to go to the kitchen, don't think you're going to lose the money for the kitchen because if you put the other projects up, because people will give to those projects because they give to what excites them and where their heart functions. And so we always had maintenance, because you just need, that's not sexy, but you need it to be done. You just don't want your property falling to bits. We always had a mission project because it's really great to be able to give money away to other people, exactly like Chris was saying. Always had a building project. Now, you can have small building projects or large building projects, and we always had something like we're refurbishing offices, or we're adding things to the foyer, or we're putting in this, that or the other. It wasn't like we're going to build the mega building, but there's plenty of building projects you can have around the place. We had a mercy project, and mercy projects are tax deductible. You know, you can get government money off those. Music. You can get a tax-deductible music fund. I don't know whether you know that, but for anything in music, you can get a tax-deductible fund on that. It's got a special name that escapes me at the moment. It's cultural trust. Yeah, some sort of cultural trust. Yep. Christian education, scripture in schools, that's if you're still allowed to do that where you are, that attracts a tax deduction. Now, this is a lovely one. Our church, our ministry. Now, I learnt that from Mark Connor, who ran the big Pentecostal church down in Sydney, down in Melbourne. Very sharp guy, Mark. And he talked about our church, our ministry. I think my successor called it our church, our future, which was even smarter. But effectively what that is give us a whole bucket of money that we can do anything we like with, which is really cool. But what it allows you to do, and you will get money for this if people are happy with where the church is going. But it does allow you to do, and it was very, very well supported. Always well supported, much better supported than I ever thought it would be. And what it does is it allows you not to go cap in hand over things. You know, you don't have to be running back at Christmas time saying, oh, our budget's $5,000 down short for the year, because you can take it out of our church, our ministry. You can take the expenses for running the campaign out of our church, our ministry. You can take, when you decide to go out and hire a new staff member, like a dynamic guy like Stuart Starr, but nobody knows him, so you have him as a project, but they give a certain amount, well, you can top him up out of our church, our ministry. I don't know whether you knew you were topped up, but you were topped up. Now, we didn't top up. With staffing, we sometimes had staff positions that were staffing things that were seed fund positions. So when we hired Stuart, we knew it was a big jump because he was a very expensive guy. He did want the jacuzzi, but that was a big jump. And so you might give a half-time position 1 year to start paying for themselves. A full-time position you might get 2. But I didn't want to be constantly paying for a staff member's salary out of this. I wanted a seed fund to start member's salary, and then you put the blowtorch on the staff member to actually get out and generate some new ministries himself and raise, and he wouldn't be raising the money, but by the ministries that were there, the money was raised. So that was what we did there. And we always had 6. And people gave generously to them. And again, it's the thing that people will give where their heart is. But what I would caution you is, supposing you have a situation where you need $20,000 for a particular project that you're doing and you only get 10. Under no circumstances take that 10 and put it somewhere else. You will kill your integrity stone dead. Much better to say, we've got the 10, we're going to hold this, we're going to do it again next year. You either supplement it from our church, our ministry and do it, you either supplement it from church funds and do it, or you say, I'm going to hold this and we're going to make it a project next year. But as soon as you start saying, I'm going to do money for this and don't do it, is your credibility starts dropping out the window, and you will just kill yourself. You really will. And somebody was telling me about that in the church the other day, where a certain amount of money was raised. They decided not to go on with the project, and the money is just evaporating into the general church ether, and that's a real downer. Okay, where are we? Okay, all right. Next components. We promoted these by special brochures. We promoted them by videos. Now, what I want to say to you is the videos have got to be, for us, they've got to be humorous. You know, they've got to be engaging. People have got to want to watch them. And if you make them engaging and funny, people will want to watch them, and so you can even show them over and over again. And we made 3 or 4 or 5 every year, and I showed them over about a 4 or 5 week period during our commitment series. But some of them were so good that that we just laughed our way about them. And I want to say to you that I had no part in making these. I wanted them to happen. I wanted them to happen good. But the creative input was done by people like Bruce Clark, by Trevor Hodge. I think you might have had an input into them too, Stuart. Other people who were far more creative in this area than I did it. But you'll find them in your church. You'll find these creative, techie people, and they're just sitting there and they haven't been able to use that ministry, and you just, you get the impression that you're doing it. What you don't want is boring, stodgy videos, because that will downgrade everything. What are the other components? We had a commitment month of Bible readings, because this is a faith-raising exercise, so it wasn't just about money, it was about Bible readings that were generally arranged about the passages. There was small group studies that were again written specifically for the passages. I got other people to write those. I even had some written by Archbishop Harry Goodhue, so we pulled in the big guns to do it. He was in the parish by that stage, retired. We had a ministry vision dinner every year at which we cast the vision for the church as it was going to be the next year. And so I would make a vision speech. We'd try and get about 250 people there, and we'd fill the place up, and we would sort of talk about the ministries that were happening. We would honour certain people's ministries. The year before Stuart came, we got him to come down. And so we paraded him and Carolyn in front of the people. We wanted as much as possible to say this church is on the move, we're going somewhere. On one particular occasion, we'd had a really good year of evangelism, and Bruce Clark invited as many people that had got saved that year to come to the dinner, and we talked about God moving in people's lives. And Bruce said, would everybody who became Christians last year stand up? And people are standing up all over the room. And so, people are actually seeing tangibly that this vision for changing lives for the Lord Jesus Christ was actually happening in people's lives. So, people want to give to that sort of stuff. We had a time of prayer. We had a 4 or 5 or 6 week series of sermons to build disciples or to cast vision. Now, I would want to say to you, there was only one of them was generally on money. I didn't have 6 money sermons. In my earlier years, I remember having 3 money sermons in a row, and the congregation dropped off towards the end of that. But no, the whole series was pushing towards Commitment Day, but only one of them specifically was on a tithing or a generosity or a money type issue. Sometimes I had 2, but mainly one, and that was normally the week before Commitment Day. I, particularly at the start, had an endorsement by the most significant lay member of the congregation, and we had one man. We had a number of really core lay leaders, but there was one guy that was probably the most respected lay leader in the congregation, and he and I were very close. He was a great guy. And so he would, particularly at the first time, he introduced it to the congregation and said that we're going to do this. And so normally people said, well, if that guy thinks it's all right, it's all right. People would ask questions like, what if my income goes down next year? I would say, well, look, we do need to know. We do need to know for planning purposes. I heard Chris say that, and that it does help. But in the longer term, if somebody's got some crisis that goes on in their life, they've got to deal with that crisis. And we know that sometimes, some people drop their giving for some reason, other people will increase their giving for some reason. And so it tends to balance out. So I said, that's all right, don't worry about that. You're not actually so much, you're not signing it in blood so much that if you're husband leaves you and you're out in the street, you're still committed to giving this amount of money. You know, we understand that. Mainly that doesn't happen, of course. People questioned, let not your right hand know what your left hand know what your right hand is doing. I just thought, and again, you can be critical of that if you like, but I didn't think Jesus was talking about this. I thought Jesus in that way was talking to the Pharisees and the leaders there about parading their piety before men. And he did it in terms of fasting, he did it in terms of praying, he did it in terms of almsgiving. And I didn't think it was anything to do with King David casting a vision and saying he was going to be part of that vision. That was just, I just thought it was taking it all out of context. But I addressed that to the congregation. I talked to them. But people, you know, I said, some of you might actually have that verse rattling around in your head. But I said, if you take those things in that way, then you will never have a prayer meeting. Because it says go into your cupboard and lock your doors and don't let people see you praying. It's got to be said in context. Why would I sign my name? Well, it is, I've said, it's a faith issue, not a money issue. What do you expect? You expect 30 to 40% of people to sign the cards. That's what I expected. You don't expect the whole congregation to do it. You will get more people over time, but remember, money is the last domino to fall in people's commitment to the Lord. You know, it's where their treasure is. But those 30 to 40% give 80 to 90% of the money. Okay? So that's really important. Generally, and I want to say this as a general rule, I'm not talking about specifics. I know that there will be glorious exceptions to this for a range of reasons, but generally the people who demand secrecy are not giving. Generally, they're not giving. Okay? Now, I know there'll be exceptions to that. I know there are people who are brought up in different traditions, but the people who say, my giving is between me and God, 99 times out of 100, that will be a smokescreen. You just got to smile at people and you just keep teaching and you wear down barriers on these things over the years. You will generally get positive feedback from givers. Now, they'll be excited because they will see the money coming in, they will see the gospel going forward. They want their church to be healthy. No, the average church member doesn't want to see a sick church. Older people, don't worry about what older people will be thinking, because let me tell you, from my generation, we are seeing the constant erosion of Christian values. So I was brought up, I started going to Sunday school in the 50s. I mean, the Methodist church that I was going to at some stage, we actually had 3 Sunday schools in a day. They had one in the morning, they had another one and the second one in the morning, and there was a 2 o'clock in the afternoon one. So we were just brought up in a completely different Christian milieu. I went to a Sunday school exam that was held on a Saturday morning. You just think about those sort of things. So we've seen that go down to the Tinder generation, and we agonise over it. And I can tell you, what we want is churches that are vital and healthy, that our grandchildren will grow up and come to Christ in and meet their partners. And if you can cast a vision with older people for that, they will give to it. We had a children's ministry position advertised, a part-time position. One guy in our early service who was my age, who had grandchildren, came out and he said to the treasurer, I'll fund that position. Bang, just like that. Just like he did it himself. Because we've got that heart. We know it might be different if when you're younger and you've grown up in this generation that we've got, and don't remember another time when Christian ministers were more honoured, when the press wasn't constantly attacking the church, for all of that. And generally Christianity, while it mightn't have been perfect by any means, way, shape or form, had a much more honoured place in society. We remember it. There are echoes of it for us. And for me, I feel very sad that it's just so degenerated. And so if you cast for me a vision of a church that will somehow restore a vital, vibrant Christianity in the lives of people, well, we'll give to it. What more to expect? You expect general joy, You will expect some nervousness for the 60 to 65% who are not giving. And I remember the first time we did it. We'd never done it before. I put it out there, and there are people saying, this is not going to work, is it? It's not going to work. Do you think it's going to work? No, I don't think it's going to work. What's right on about? He's crazy. He's nuts. It's not going to work. Well, when we got the results in, and it massively exceeded our expectations. We had a budget of 1 year of $7,700 the year before I did it. We were actually getting $7,000. We wanted to get for the next year $8,500. The commitment card said we were going to get $9,700. We actually got $10,500. And so I just was able to get up. I didn't get up and just say, look, there's 65% of you stingy mob that didn't give, sucks to you. You don't say that sort of stuff, because I know that they were good, godly people wrestling with these things. And so you get up and you say, look, I just want to thank you for the way in which this church has so blessed the ministry, and this is what we're going to do with it, and we're going to just keep on going. And when are we going to stop? Well, when everybody in the world knows Jesus. That's when we're going to stop. That's when we're going to stop having commitment days. And generally, people resonate with that because they want the gospel to go forward and they want their church to be healthy. Generally, people don't leave if you do this well. And I really love John Maxwell's phrase. He says, you choose who you lose. He reminds us that Jesus lost people. And if you are a high commitment church, you will attract high commitment people. If you are a low commitment church, you will attract low commitment people. Where will the high commitment church go? They will go to Chris's church because he will challenge them. And they'll go to Brian Houston's church. They will go to the high commitment people. They want targets. They want you to challenge them. They want you to be kicking goals. They want to be going over the trenches, going to meet the enemy. And so those people, they'll go with the Pentecostals. They'll go with anywhere that'll give them a big vision. And you will be left with the whingers and the grumblers and the low commitment people who won't give you time or money. So remember, you choose who you lose. So you've got to do things graciously. You've got to do things in a godly way. I'm not talking about being abrasive in any way, shape or form. But don't be scared to put a great, big, bold gospel mission in front of people and ask them to give to it. And the ones who get upset, if they get upset with your presentation or the way in which you've done it, that's one thing. But if they get upset with the gospel, let them waddle off down the street to a liberal church and give their no money down there. In the follow-up, I did write, I'm scared to say this after Chris's comment, I did write 3 or 4 thank you letters, but I take Chris's point very well, that often the thank you letter is just an asking for money letter at the same time. I did write a thank you letter. I've got some, because you just do need to remind people. I got a letter from one of the colleges I support the other day, and I nearly wrote back and said, thank you very much, because this is the first time you've sent me a letter which hasn't asked for money in it. You just sent me a letter to thank me. And I actually felt that was quite good. So Chris made a real good point there. So you need to remember that with your thank you letters. But you also do need to remind people during the year of what they've given, or what they're giving. And you also need to fill them in on where the vision is coming from, because you need to tell them what's going on with their money. And I've got a sample calendar there about the way in which I operated this, because we normally, for us, we had a 5 or 6 week series in which, for us, we started basically the day people were coming back from the October holidays. That worked for us. And all the prayer things, the vision dinners and all the rest of it were in there.